What happened when an undercover CEO traded his luxury office for a greasy kitchen apron? Welcome, brilliant viewers. You always know how to pick a powerful story. In today's video, we follow a CEO who secretly joins his resort staff to uncover the hidden reality of food waste behind the scenes. What he finds isn't just shocking, it's heartbreaking. But instead of walking away, he decides to take action that changes everything for his company and the community. If you believe real leadership means getting your hands dirty, this story will stay with you. Let's go on. David Ellison tightened the strings of his apron and stepped through the back entrance of Coastal Breeze Resort's kitchen, the scent of garlic, seared fish, and citrus cleaners swirling around him. The resort was the crown jewel of his hospitality empire, a place where guests sipped champagne by the infinity pool and grazed at elaborate buffets. But tonight, David wasn't there as the CEO of Ellison Leisure Group. Dressed in scuffed sneakers, black slacks, and a plain polo shirt, he blended in as a newly hired kitchen porter. Just another face in the back of the house. The dishwashing station buzzed with urgency. Steam rolled off industrial sinks, trays clattered against metal counters, and voices barked orders above the roar of the exhaust fans. No one gave him a second glance as he grabbed a soaking tray and began scrubbing, trying to keep pace with the flow of dishes from the buffet line. His muscles ached within minutes. This wasn't the comfortable office chair or marble-floored boardroom he was used to. This was the heartbeat of his resort. David's plan was simple: to see the truth with his own eyes. Not the curated data and quarterly reports, but the everyday grind of his employees. As sweat beaded down his back and a splash of curry stained his sleeve, he realized he had only scratched the surface. He wasn't sure what exactly he was looking for yet, but something told him the kitchen would show him more than any spreadsheet ever could. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Less than 2 hours into his first shift, David watched in stunned silence as tray after tray of untouched food was scraped into the garbage. Perfectly grilled salmon fillets, colorful roasted vegetables, and whole dinner rolls, gone without a second thought. The pace was relentless. At the far end of the line, Chef Miguel Torres lifted a pan of untouched beef medallions and dumped them straight into the trash. "Buffet was light tonight," he muttered, noticing David's hesitation. "Steel tossed 30 pounds easy." "That's on the low side." David blinked, momentarily thrown. "We throw that much away? Even if it's untouched?" Miguel glanced at him, an eyebrow raised. "Health codes. Once it's out on the line, it's got a time limit. Doesn't matter if no one touched it. And management doesn't want the risk." He turned back to the grill, flipping a pan with practiced ease. "Plus, guests want options. They don't care if it means waste. They want full trays till the last minute." David returned to the sink, his hands working mechanically as his mind reeled. He'd read about operational inefficiencies in reports, percentages, projections, loss margins, but seeing it in person made the numbers feel grotesquely real. A bus tub clattered beside him as Jared, the dining hall assistant, unloaded another stack of plates, many still heavy with food. "Table 6 barely touched anything," Jared said, shrugging. "They just wanted to see what the buffet looked like, I guess." David looked down at the pile of wasted shrimp cocktail and untouched couscous. He thought about the costs: financial, environmental, human. This wasn't just inefficiency, this was something deeply broken. And the worst part? No one seemed surprised. It was just business as usual. Later that evening, during a brief lull between dinner rushes, David found himself stacking clean glasses beside Jared Ank at the service counter. The young dining hall assistant moved with practiced ease, humming under his breath as he wiped down trays. David seized the quiet moment. "Is it always like this?" he asked casually, nodding toward the dish pit where piles of half-eaten meals still waited to be tossed. Jared gave a short laugh. "Pretty much. Rich folks on vacation take one bite of everything, then leave the rest. Seen someone load up 3 lobster tails and not finish one." He tossed a rag onto the cart. "Happens every day." David leaned on the counter, trying to mask the heaviness in his chest. "Doesn't anyone try to stop it? Feels like a lot." Jared shrugged, grabbing another tray. "Tried to ask about it once. Got told to focus on clearing tables, not policies." His tone was light, but David heard the resignation underneath. Management doesn't want to deal with the hassle. It's easier to throw it out. The two men stood in silence for a moment as the hum of the dishwasher filled the air. David looked back at the kitchen doors where more food was being prepared, some of it destined for the garbage before it ever met a plate. This wasn't just inefficiency, it was routine. He realized then that no one had ever asked why. They'd simply accepted it as part of the job. But David couldn't. Not anymore. The next morning, David reported early, just in time to witness the chaotic setup of the resort's legendary brunch buffet. Trays of scrambled eggs, breakfast sausages, fruit platters, and pastries were wheeled out in rapid succession, with chefs scrambling to meet the standard of abundance guests expected. As the crowd thickened and plates began cycling back, David's attention was drawn to Priya Mehra, a buffet prep chef with a focused demeanor and weary eyes. He watched as she scraped nearly half a tray of scrambled eggs, still steaming, into a lined garbage bin. "That still looks fresh," David said cautiously, gesturing to the discarded eggs. Priya looked over her shoulder and shook her head. "It sat too long. Policy says it's a health risk now. Doesn't matter how good it looks." She reached for another pan, already preparing to replace it. David hesitated. "Has anyone ever tried to save the food somehow, like donate it?" Priya's expression hardened slightly. "We've tried. A few of us talked to management last year about setting up a system, but it went nowhere. Liability concerns." "They didn't even want to hear it." She dumped another tray of barely touched hash browns. "We hate it too, believe me, but we follow orders." David felt the weight of her words. Not just the food, but the morale was being thrown away. Watching her work, he could sense the frustration behind her efficiency. The way she moved quickly, but with the air of someone resigned to waste. This wasn't neglect, it was policy. Policy he had signed off on without fully understanding its impact. Standing there in the thick of it, the reality struck him. The problem wasn't just food waste. It was the system that allowed it, normalized it, and silenced those who questioned it. That night, after his shift ended, David sat alone in the modest staff quarters provided to temporary kitchen workers. The mattress was thin, the walls bare, and the hum of the walk-in freezer next door echoed faintly through the room. He rubbed his sore wrists and stared at the notepad he'd hidden in his duffel bag, its pages now filled with messy tallies and quick notes. Pounds of food tossed, trays discarded before even being served. The numbers were staggering: 30, 40, sometimes over 50 pounds of food wasted in a single meal service. Multiply that by the resort's weekly buffets, then by the dozens of other resorts under his brand, and the scale became overwhelming. He had always seen food waste listed as a minor line item in quarterly reports, filed under operational loss. But here, living it, the term felt offensive. This wasn't a loss, it was an avoidable crisis. He thought about Priya's quiet frustration, Miguel's blunt realism, Jared's resigned laughter. They were good people, doing their jobs, stuck in a system that left no room for flexibility or compassion. And until now, he had been part of the reason why. David leaned back against the headboard, his body aching, but his mind racing. The waste wasn't just in the food. It was in the potential, the effort, the care. He'd come here to learn. Now he understood. Observing wasn't enough. He had to act. But first, he needed more than outrage. He needed evidence. Determined to do more than just watch, David arrived at the kitchen the next morning with a new mission: gather proof. Not just vague impressions or offhand comments, but concrete, undeniable data. Between scrubbing pans and loading dish racks, he began quietly tracking the waste, counting discarded trays, estimating portion sizes, and jotting down every untouched steak, croissant, and omelet that ended up in the trash. He made mental notes of patterns: over-prep before brunch, buffet items swapped out every hour regardless of consumption, entire trays tossed at the slightest sign of imperfection. Every minute detail went into the notebook hidden in his apron pocket. Later that night, as the staff hauled trash bags out to the resort's dumpsters, David followed at a distance, his curiosity pulling him further. That's when he saw them. 3 men lingering just beyond the perimeter fence, their clothes ragged, eyes darting toward the bins. When the kitchen lights dimmed and the staff turned away, one of them stepped forward and quietly opened a lid, rummaging through the bag. David froze. He'd spent his career perfecting the luxury experience. 5-star dining, decadent spreads, waste built into the illusion of abundance. And now, just yards from his flagship resort, hungry hands were digging through garbage for food his kitchens had thrown out. The contrast was gut-wrenching. Miguel stepped outside, lighting a cigarette, and caught David's stare. "They come by sometimes," he said quietly. "We're not allowed to give them anything, so they wait until we're done." David couldn't answer. He had all the numbers he needed now, but what struck him most was the image. Good food in trash bags, desperate people in the shadows. No spreadsheet could capture that. It was time to confront the system that had made this feel normal. The next day, David returned to the kitchen with a new edge in his voice. Between shifts, he pulled Priya aside near the walk-in cooler and asked bluntly, "Why can't we give any of it away? Not even what's untouched?" She sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "We've asked before. Management says it's a liability issue. If someone gets sick from donated food, the resort could get sued. Easier to toss it than take the risk." Her tone was flat. This wasn't the first time she'd explained it. Later, David asked Miguel the same question. The chef scoffed. "You think we like dumping trays of food? We hate it. But the rules are the rules. Legal won't budge, and corporations don't want the PR mess." David had spent years hearing the word liability in boardrooms, wielded like a shield against action. It had always sounded reasonable in the abstract. But now it sounded like an excuse to avoid responsibility, to ignore the people he'd seen digging through trash, and to overlook the staff crushed by guilt every time they threw out food they knew was still good. The problem wasn't a lack of will. It was a lack of permission, and he was the one who could grant it. If fear of consequences had kept them silent, then it was up to him to change the conversation. Because no policy should be more powerful than doing the right thing, and he couldn't stay silent anymore. That evening, David left the resort kitchen not as a porter, but as a man with a mission. Back in his private office overlooking the coast, he changed out of his grease-stained uniform and sat at his desk, notebook open, pen poised, and phone in hand. The evidence was all there. Daily waste logs he'd created himself, first-hand testimonies from staff, and the haunting image of hungry locals scavenging from bins behind his luxury resort. The numbers alone painted a damning picture. Hundreds of pounds of food wasted weekly, thousands across all properties. But what struck him most were the people, the cooks who hated tossing good meals, the staff who felt voiceless, and the individuals waiting in the shadows for scraps. For years, David had focused on expansion, profit margins, and brand prestige, but all of it rang hollow now. If the cost of luxury was silent suffering and systemic waste, then the model needed to change. Without hesitation, he picked up the phone and called Tasha Reed, his director of resort operations. "Clear your calendar," he said. "We're calling a full executive meeting tomorrow. I'm done pretending we don't see this." Tasha, surprised but attentive, asked, "Is this about the waste issue?" David's voice was steady. "It's about everything, and we're changing it, starting now." As he hung up, he didn't feel uncertainty or fear. He felt purpose. For the first time in years, David Ellison wasn't managing from a distance. He was leading from the front. The boardroom was quiet as David stood at the head of the long glass table, a stack of papers and his worn notebook beside him. The executives of Ellison Leisure Group had gathered at his request, some curious, others uneasy. He began by laying out the facts, the food waste he'd personally documented, the health code constraints cited by staff, and the reality of people scavenging behind the resort. He spoke plainly, not as a CEO citing projections, but as someone who had scrubbed pans, hauled trash, and seen the problem with his own eyes. "We throw out thousands of pounds of edible food every week," he said, scanning the room. "And just outside our walls, people are going hungry. That ends now." A murmur spread across the table. One executive leaned forward, skeptical. "You're suggesting we donate leftover food? That's a legal nightmare. One lawsuit and—" "There are ways to do it safely," David cut in. "Other businesses have done it. We've just been too comfortable to try," another voice chimed in, hesitant. "The logistics, storage, transportation, partner vetting, it'll be expensive." David nodded. "Not as expensive as the moral debt we're racking up." Silence followed until Tasha Reed, director of resort operations, broke it. "The staff have been asking for this for years," she said firmly. "They want to help. We just haven't let them." Slowly, support began to build. Some voices remained cautious, others inspired, but no one outright objected. By the end of the meeting, David had what he needed: reluctant consensus. The room hadn't erupted in applause, but it had shifted. Enough to begin. David left the meeting with a list of action items, legal follow-ups, and pilot program plans. For the first time, the corporate machine was moving toward compassion, and he wasn't stopping until it arrived. Coastal Breeze Resort was chosen as the pilot site for the new food redistribution initiative, and the rollout began just days after the executive meeting. A new protocol was introduced. All leftover food meeting safety standards would be logged, stored properly, and packaged for donation to local shelters. Waste tracking sheets were taped above prep stations, and donation bins replaced the usual trash tubs. Some staff were cautiously optimistic. Others were skeptical, expecting the program to fizzle like previous half-hearted initiatives. David returned to the kitchen, not undercover this time, but in plain sight, watching quietly as the staff adapted. There were hiccups. Some trays were still discarded out of habit. Questions about packaging, timing, and storage created delays. One manager grumbled about the added workload. But despite the early stumbles, something was different. When Priya placed a full tray of uneaten rice pilaf into a donation bin instead of the trash, she smiled for the first time in days. "Feels good," she muttered. Jared, now in charge of logging buffet waste, took his role seriously, proudly tallying the saved items. Miguel, ever the realist, admitted, "Didn't think this would actually happen." The kitchen began to buzz with a different energy. Not just duty, but purpose. As trays were loaded into insulated containers and wheeled toward the loading dock, David stood near the back exit, hands in his pockets, watching the shift take hold. It was messy, imperfect, and far from seamless, but for the first time, the resort wasn't just feeding the privileged, it was feeding hope. The following morning, David returned to the resort, not in a suit or apron, but in jeans and a plain polo, wanting to witness the result of their first full night under the new policy. At the back loading dock, a small box truck from the Seaside Outreach Shelter waited with its doors open. Volunteers, smiling and efficient, carefully packed trays of food into coolers, pastries, roasted vegetables, chicken breasts, and pasta that had been destined for the trash just the day before. One of the volunteers, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and sun-weathered skin, noticed David standing off to the side. She approached him, brushing her hands on her pants before extending one. "You're the one who started this, right?" David hesitated before nodding. "In a way, yes." She clasped his hand warmly. "I'm Celeste. I run the shelter's kitchen. You have no idea what this means to us. Our clients usually get canned food, bread if we're lucky. This is dignity on a plate." Her words struck something deep. David looked at the van, at the team securing the meals, and at the staff watching from the kitchen door. Some with curiosity, others with pride. The difference was visible. The food wasn't just being saved, it was being given meaning. For the first time in his career, David didn't feel pride from a stock report or a media feature. He felt it here, in this small act of humanity that rippled beyond the resort walls. The numbers mattered, but this was the reason. Weeks later, David returned to Coastal Breeze Resort. Not as a CEO inspecting progress or a kitchen worker in disguise, but simply as a guest. He dined quietly in a corner of the restaurant, observing the smooth rhythm of the buffet line and the staff behind it. There was a new energy in the kitchen, less waste, more purpose. Priya moved confidently between stations, Jared managed the donation logs with practiced ease, and Miguel cracked a rare smile as he called out orders. After finishing his meal, David stepped out to the loading dock just as the donation van arrived. Volunteers efficiently loaded trays of surplus food, now part of a carefully tracked, safely handled routine. Celeste was there again, chatting warmly with the kitchen team like they were longtime partners. When she spotted David, she waved. "Second delivery this week. We're feeding twice as many families now." He nodded, humbled by how quickly the impact had grown. The change was no longer an experiment, it was embedded in the culture. Across the company, other resorts had begun adopting the same procedures with legal frameworks and community partnerships tailored to each location. It hadn't been easy, some pushback still lingered, but the shift was happening. David stood there for a moment, watching the van disappear down the palm-linked road. For years, he'd measured success in square footage, market share, and guest satisfaction. But now, success looked different. Simpler, more human. He hadn't just changed policy, He changed lives. And this, he knew, was only the beginning. The story of David Ellison's undercover journey at Coastal Breeze Resort reveals a powerful lesson about leadership, responsibility, and empathy. True change doesn't come from boardroom decisions alone. It comes from understanding the realities faced by those on the ground. By stepping into the shoes of his frontline workers, David saw the staggering food waste his company had long overlooked, not just as numbers on a spreadsheet, but as a deeply human issue with real consequences. He learned that policies built on fear of liability, of inconvenience, can prevent meaningful action even when the solution is within reach. The moment he witnessed people scavenging through resort dumpsters was a turning point, transforming his perception of success and prompting a shift from profit-driven decisions to purpose-driven leadership. Through humility, action, and persistence, David helped build a system that served both business efficiency and social good. The lesson is clear. Leadership is not just about scaling up. It's about looking down, listening, and lifting others up. When leaders take the time to truly understand the impact of their choices, they unlock the ability to create change that is not only effective, but compassionate. And that kind of leadership can ripple far beyond the walls of any business.